Hello everybody, it's Seth, and today I will be playing a game called Ex Novo. Ex Novo is a procedurally generated, yet manual, town and city builder that can be played with 1 to 4 people. Today I will be giving it a go myself to see how it operates. If you're interested to learn more about Ex Novo, there will be a link in the description below. First we start with the discussion phase, which will determine the size and age of our town. What that means is how many potential districts that we can have, how many citizen tokens we start with, and the amount of development phases that we will go through. This effectively determines how long the game will take. I have discussed it with myself, and will be playing with a small city, which gives us 9 lines, 8 citizen tokens, and the age will be grown, which gives us 10 development phases. Effectively, this size for one person will take about an hour. So I've sped up the video 6 times, so it should only take about 10 minutes from start to finish. That way you don't have to sit through my many drawing errors. So as you can see, I have already divided up my map into the various districts, as well as rolled in order to get that initial geography that I'm starting with. That roll gave me hills, so I have added a whole bunch of hills there so that we can kind of start to see what this is going to look like. I have a mental image that we've got a little bit of a valley thing going on here, so we'll just see what that turns into. So after the initial terrain geography, we will be rolling the dice 4 times in order to determine the additional features that we will be adding onto the map. So as you can see, the first one that I had was a mountain, then next is river. So I've got a river going down from the mountain, and then my third one that I've got is caves. So that'll be interesting. I think that actually goes pretty well with the mountain. Then we'll see what's up, and oh, a lake. Okay, so I think I'm just gonna slap the lake right here in the middle. I can see that being kind of a major feature for this city, hopefully. So next in the founding phase, we will be determining the purpose and location for this. So rolling the dice, we managed to get a trade route. So that's why this city was being founded. So what we're going to do is figure out how do we want this trade route to be drawn in. So I'm thinking maybe 2, maybe 1 by land and then 1 by that river. I think that might make sense. We'll just see where we go from there. So with the trade route comes some type of resource that I need to add. So I'm actually thinking that it makes sense for the trade routes to eventually make it to that lake that's in the center, since that's really the main fixture there. So I'm thinking maybe this lake is rich in pearls. So after figuring out the location, next is the purpose decision. So why was this city founded? So my roll gave me nomads settling down. So what I'm going to do is choose a district for them to do that initial settle. And again, with the resource being right there on that lake, I think it makes sense for right in the center of the valley for that initial settlement to go. So I'm going to shade that in and give them one of the citizen tokens. Next up is determining the power hierarchy. And what I managed to get is an unstructured collective. So that one is asking me to draw the route that led them here. So I'm thinking maybe they were sent away from the city or area that they were in before as nomads. So last in the founding phase is determining the factions of the town or city. So what we rolled is create 2 opposing or uneasy allies, 2 uneasy allies. So I'm creating the initial ones, the initial settlers, the hermitage. So they were driven out of their area as nomads and wanted to become hermits. So they were the initial founders of the city. So that's why that they're kind of in that initial District 1 area. But then I think for my second one, I'm going to say the Mercantile Guild, since there's a lot of trade that's going on here. Now, maybe there is an alliance between the 2 because they know they need each other in order to exist. So that's what I'm going to do. So next up, I need to draw out some insignias, some logos for them. So we'll do that here for a bit. So since the Hermitage is the ones that initially have power, I'm going to go ahead and create a landmark for them. So I'm thinking I'm going to call it like the Well of Life or something like that. That's what has drawn them here. Not just the shiny pearls in the lake, but also some water that has some healing benefits. So that's what we're going to go there and go ahead and assign the citizen token to that as well. And then last, I get to name it. I'm not very original, so I'm going to call this place Hillshire. Not farms, but just Hillshire. So now we're moving on to the development phase. And this we're going to have 10 of those. So for our first one, we get 231. An outsider upsets the balance. So it wants me to have a faction gain or lose power. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the Mercantile Guild gain some power, in addition to giving them at least part of this district, and I'm also going to give them a landmark. We're going to call it the Street Bazaar, which makes sense since the trade routes kind of converge here. So for the next development, we're going to have the city rise in prominence. So the Mercantile Guild continues to gain some power, and then Hillshire becomes a trading city. So we're starting to see the power balance shift. So for our third development phase, we have the trade war costs dearly. So maybe those Mercantile Guild guys got a little too big for their britches and are getting knocked down a peg. Maybe the resource that we started off with is getting a little bit more scarce. For our fourth development phase, we get a leadership vacuum. Oh my. So in this case, I'm going to have the Hermitage faction actually removed. So yeah, even though the Mercantile Guild was starting to lose some power, I'm going to have them gain it back up again. You know, they're the ones that are getting a lot of that money, a lot of those resources, and are driving the hermits away. For the next development phase, we get a new mode of transportation. So that's an interesting one that I've got to think about. The timeline that I had in this was kind of fantasy, but that fantasy slowly turning into modern times. So I'm going to say steamboats. Steamboats are some type of clockwork aquatic vessel of some sort. So, widening the river, maybe there's just more traffic up and down there. So we're going to change this a little bit. I also really like the idea of adding another landmark. We definitely need one of those. So I'm going to go ahead and add some docks here right before the merchants district. It makes sense for it to be relatively close since that's where a lot of the trade is going to be originating from. So for the sixth development phase, we get pests in the city multiply. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to destroy the original settlement that we created. It's going to become ruins because that's where the pests are going to originate from. And I'm going to have some of those people move out of that area and then move over into the docks. So for our lucky number 7 development phase, I have got social housing. So we're going to create another district. Now, just trying to think, since we have a lot of people that are displaced from those initial ruins now, I think it makes sense to create some slums and move some people there. Also, there's going to need to be a lot more, we'll say, blue-collar labor going on in this town now. Next up for development phase 8, we have local arts develop. So we're going to go ahead and create another faction. This one I'm going to call the Artisans Guild. So we've got a lot of trade coming in and out of this place. It would make sense for some people to move here in order to develop that, in order to help sell their wares. So I like the idea of an Artisans Guild now. So we've got a logo created. That's a paintbrush, by the way. It's actually really difficult because we're recording with the machine that we're drawing on. It's a laptop. It doesn't necessarily like that. So for our 9th development phase, we get city goes underground. Okay, now what could that be? I'm thinking what we're going to do is we're actually going to have the Hermitage come back, except they never really left. They may have left their initial settlement that descended into ruins and had a plague of rats or something, but what they ended up actually doing is they moved over into the caves, and they've been living underground, feeding off of that well of life, that life-giving water. So for our final development phase, I've got a terrible season. So what we're going to say is that the slums have been destroyed by flooding, and that many of those workers have been taken in by the Hermitage. So that kind of gives us an even distribution between the Hermitage, the Mercantile Guild, and the docks. So an even build, and that's causing tensions to kind of rise. So even though the Mercantile Guild is in power since they've got all of that money, the other factions are starting to rise up and grow. So maybe the Artisans Guild, they're just kind of there with those Mercantile Guild folk. However, the dock workers are wanting to rise up. The Hermitage wants to reclaim their land. Maybe it's Holy Land. I mean, that water is really special. So, here we have kind of the budding, tense little town that's growing, but, maybe there's going to be some political intrigue or some subterfuge going on that's going to cause some of the factions to change in power here soon. I really feel like this town could be a fun little starting area for a group of adventurers in a, D&D or some other style fantasy campaign. In any case, here we have created the town of Hillshire, a small little city with a lot of stories to tell. So this was a really interesting way to spend the last hour. It really got those creative juices flowing. It really kind of made me think a little bit outside of the box. Sometimes building cities doesn't sound like the most fun thing, even for some of those seasoned DMs and GMs out there. But it was a really interesting way to do it. I'd really like to see what doing this with other people would be like. I could see it being very advantageous to get other creative input, get other people to roll those dice for you. And it could be a really fun group activity. I could see it being very interesting to actually have a party of adventurers build their city prior to starting a new campaign or one-shot. Ultimately, would I recommend the Ex Novo system for people? Well, yes, I would. It's actually a really fun, really interesting way of doing it. Reminds me a little bit of Fiasco, just with how the dice interact with creating it and being a very creative and open narrative. So for $8, I don't know, why don't you just go give it a shot yourself? See if you like it. In any case, thanks for sticking it all the way through. Have a good one.